They tell you the silence is the worst part of the graveyard shift. They're wrong. The worst part is when the silence breaks. It's the single, unexplained sound in the dead of night that reminds you just how alone you truly are, and that maybe you're not alone enough. It's the lesson every night worker learns eventually. Some doors are better left unopened, some calls are better left unanswered, and some shadows have a life of their own. I used to work as a security guard, a simple overnight gig at a small tech warehouse on the industrial outskirts of the city. The pay was surprisingly good, mostly because nobody wanted the shift. The company dealt in high-end electronics, the kind of stuff that would fetch a pretty penny, so 24/7 surveillance was non-negotiable. My duties were mundane. Watch the 16 black and white monitors, do a walking tour of the perimeter every 2 hours, and occasionally fill out a report if a light bulb flickered out. This particular night, a thick, suffocating rain was hammering against the corrugated metal roof, a relentless drumming that swallowed every other sound. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the very foundation of the building. In a way, nights like these were a comfort. The storm was a deterrent, a natural security system ensuring no one in their right mind would be creeping around. The day shift crew clocked out at 10:30 p.m., leaving me in solitary command until 6:01 a.m. For the first couple of hours, the only company I had was the rhythmic creaking of the building and the roar of the rain. Around 2 a.m., my eyes started to burn from staring at the screens. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the linoleum, and decided it was time for my patrol. I started at the far end of the warehouse, in the cavernous storage section where towering metal shelves created a maze of shadows. As I began my walk back towards the front offices, a shrill, intermittent beeping cut through the storm's noise. It was an alert, coming from my security console. I broke into a brisk walk, my boots echoing in the empty hall. The screen was flashing a red warning: latch sensor, rear exit. Someone had tried the back door. My first instinct was to pull up the live feed for camera 12, the one covering that exact door. The image was grainy, distorted by the sheets of rain, but the alleyway behind the warehouse was utterly empty. A gust of wind, maybe? Or the storm rattling the frame just hard enough to trip the sensor. After a full minute of watching nothing, I decided to check it myself. Maybe the sensor was faulty. It had happened before. I keyed in the code to disable the local alarm, the beeping finally ceasing, and pulled open the heavy steel door. A blast of cold, wet air hit me. I peered into the darkness, the alleyway a slick, black void. Nothing. The door and its frame looked perfectly fine, the magnetic sensor clean and properly aligned. I ran a quick diagnostic from the keypad. No errors. I scanned the alley one last time, the hairs on my neck prickling, before shutting the door and engaging the deadbolt. The worst part was the paperwork. Any triggered alarm, false or not, meant a full incident report. I trudged back to the security office, sat down, and began the tedious process of filling out the digital form. I was maybe 5 minutes into it when a deafening thud reverberated through the entire building. It wasn't the thunder. This was a solid, heavy impact, like a truck hitting the side of the building. I shot up from my chair, my heart pounding against my ribs, and stared down the long, dark hallway. I didn't know where it came from. I crept out of the office, straining my ears, but there was only the sound of the rain. I moved cautiously, my hand hovering over the heavy-duty flashlight on my belt. I checked the aisles first, scanning the shelves for a toppled pallet or a fallen box. Nothing was out of place. But as I neared the front of the building, the sound of the rain grew louder, accompanied by a distinct dripping sound that wasn't coming from the roof. I rounded the final corner and my blood ran cold. The main entrance, a set of heavy glass double doors, was wide open. Wind and rain were blowing into the lobby, and on the polished concrete floor, puddles of water were reflecting the dim emergency lights. Someone was inside. I didn't hesitate. I spun around and sprinted back to the security office, my mind racing. I slammed the door, locked it, and mashed the large red emergency button on the console that silently alerted the police. As I waited, my eyes glued to the monitors, I heard more thuds, this time deeper inside the warehouse. Then, an unnerving silence that was somehow worse than the noise. The minutes stretched into an eternity, until the blessed sight of flashing blue and red lights filled the parking lot on my screen. I stayed put until an officer radioed in. I met them at the front, babbling out my report while 2 other officers swept the building, guns drawn. It wasn't long before they returned, escorting a man in handcuffs. They'd found him hiding behind a stack of boxes in the main storage area. In his hand, he'd been clutching a claw hammer. As they walked him past me, he turned his head, and his eyes locked onto mine. It was a cold, vacant stare, devoid of reason, and it chilled me to the bone. The police report a few days later offered no comfort. The man was high on a cocktail of drugs and gave no coherent reason for his actions. What did he intend to do? Why break in during a storm? Why hide with a hammer? With his mind so fractured by chemicals, there's no telling what horrors he was capable of. He's behind bars now, but I quit that job the next week. I can't do overnight shifts anymore, and on rainy nights, when the world outside is a dark, noisy blur, I still see that cold, empty stare, and I feel the horrifying certainty that I am not safe. I'm an officer with our local police department, and the shifts are a brutal, chaotic rotation. One week you're working at 10 p.m. to 10 a.m., the next you're on an early morning beat. You never really adjust. You just learn to function in a perpetual state of exhaustion. On this particular night, I was on the graveyard shift, sipping stale coffee at the station, when a call came through the dispatcher. Teenagers trespassing on private property. The location was the old St. Jude's Hospital on the edge of town, a place that had been left to rot for over a decade. It was a local legend, a magnet for kids looking to party, explore, or perform whatever stupid rituals they'd seen in movies. The entire department knew it well. This would be my 4th trip out there. I expected the usual. Walk in, find a group of kids who would either scatter like rats or sheepishly let me escort them out. I was tired. Either outcome was fine by me. I wasn't looking to make arrests, just to clear the property. When I pulled up, the building was a hulking silhouette against the night sky. But something was immediately off. A single flashlight beam was cutting through the windows of the 2nd story. It was moving erratically, darting from window to window at a frantic pace, like someone was sprinting down the hallway. I got out of my cruiser, my own heavy mag light in hand, and pushed open the groaning front doors. The air inside was stale and thick with the smell of decay and mildew. "This is the police. Announce yourselves and come to the sound of my voice." My call was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the vast, empty lobby. I stood still, listening, hoping to hear footsteps or whispers that would give me a direction. But there was nothing. Dead silent. The absolute lack of sound was more unnerving than anything, a sudden shock of adrenaline that woke me up completely. I kept my right hand resting on the grip of my holstered firearm. There's always that sliver of fear in the back of your mind. The possibility that a routine call is a setup, a lure to get an officer alone. I pushed the thought away and moved forward, my flashlight beam dancing across the debris-strewn floor. I found the main stairwell and started the climb, my steps echoing loudly in the stairwell. As I reached the top landing, a loud thud echoed from down the hall. It sounded like someone had slammed their body against a wall. It was definitely from this floor. I entered the long, dark corridor, sweeping my light from one end to the other. Empty. No one in sight. "This is your last chance. Show yourselves now," I shouted, my voice more aggressive this time. I knew this was the only stairwell to the 2nd floor. They were trapped up here with me. I waited, nothing but the faint creak of the old building settling. I proceeded with caution, methodically checking each room, my light cutting through the darkness to reveal overturned beds, graffiti-covered walls, and shattered glass. Every room was empty. When I reached the final room at the very end of the hall, the door was closed. "Police, open the door!" One final call, then I swung it open, ready for anything. The room was empty of people, but there were undeniable signs of recent activity. On the floor, several cigarettes were laid out in a small pile, tendrils of smoke still lazily rising from their tips. They had been here seconds ago. This was extremely concerning. They hadn't gone down the stairs, and the only other way out was through a broken window and a 2-story drop. Before I could even process that, the door behind me slammed shut with violent force. It was immediately followed by the sound of something heavy scraping against it, barricading me in. I threw my shoulder against the door, but it barely budged. Footsteps, a single set, were departing rapidly down the hallway. Adrenaline surged through me. I slammed my boot near the doorknob, again and again, splintering the wood until I could force it open just enough to squeeze through. A large, heavy hospital bed had been wedged against it. By the time I was out, whoever had been there was long gone. Backup arrived and we conducted a more thorough search. We spoke to the person who made the initial call, who confirmed they saw 2 teenagers. But the strangest part was the evidence, or lack thereof. I only heard one clear set of footsteps running away. I only saw one flashlight from my car. The still-burning cigarettes suggested they had left in a hurry, likely because of my arrival. But why would one of them stay behind just to trap me in a room? The next morning, a mother filed a missing person report for her teenage son. A few hours later, another mother filed an identical report for her son. They were friends. The investigation dragged on for days, then weeks, then months. It was clear they weren't coming back. Now, 6 years later, they are still missing. Their disappearance is a ghost that haunts our department. We can't be certain if the person in that hospital with me was one of those 2 kids, or if it was someone else entirely. The most plausible theory we have is that a third party was involved. Someone who took the boys and then played a dangerous game with me. But without more evidence, it's a theory that will likely never be proven. And the fate of those 2 teenagers will forever be lost to the decaying silence of that abandoned hospital. It was a bitter, snowy night when I pulled into the employee parking spot at the gas station. I worked the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., a job I'd held for several months out of sheer necessity. I hated it. The isolation, the exhaustion, the weirdos who came in at 3 a.m. But finding other work was impossible, and the night shift fit my chaotic personal life. I went in tired, as always, struggling to muster the energy for another 8 hours of fluorescent-lit boredom. My coworkers was the only other car in the lot. I went inside. We did the brief handoff, and he left, leaving me alone with the hum of the refrigerators and the swirling snow outside the large plate glass windows. My manager had left a short to-do list. It was nothing major, an hour of work at most. I decided to put it off, to save it for later when the inevitable wave of sleepiness would hit, and I'd need something to keep me moving. I was sitting behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, when a car pulled into the station around midnight. I glanced up. It was an old beat-up SUV, and it had parked next to one of the pumps. With the snow coming down, we weren't getting much traffic, but a customer every so often was normal. I went back to my phone, losing track of time for what must have been 10 minutes. When I looked up again, the SUV was still there. The headlights were off, the doors were closed, but no one had gotten out to pump gas. I stood up and walked closer to the window, peering out into the swirling snow. They couldn't just be sitting in there with the car off. The temperature was dropping and the wind was howling. A flicker of concern, mixed with a healthy dose of suspicion, went through me. I watched the dark windows of the vehicle for another few minutes. No movement, no sign of anyone inside. It was as if the car had just been abandoned at the pump. Finally, I decided I had to check. I pulled on my jacket and stepped outside. The cold was a physical blow. The wind whipped snow into my face. I was right. It was way too cold for anyone to be sitting in a dead car, or even to be outside for more than a couple of minutes. I hurried over to the SUV, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. I circled it, then cupped my hands around my eyes and pressed my face to the driver's side window, trying to see through the frosted glass. "Hello, anyone in there? Just checking to see if you're okay," I called out, my voice sounding small against the wind. From what I could tell, the car was empty. It was hard to be certain, but I was fairly sure no one was inside. Now I was just confused. I backed away from the vehicle and scanned the empty parking lot. As I started walking back toward the store, my eyes fell to the ground. That's when I noticed them, a single set of shoe prints in the snow. They led away from the driver's side door of the SUV, not toward the front entrance of the store, but around to the side of the building. By this point, I was freezing and decided to investigate from the warmth of the inside. I went back in, stood over the small space heater by the counter, and tried to warm my numb hands. I was inside for less than a minute when a heavy thump resonated from the back of the store. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. I saw nothing. I cautiously walked around the counter and toward the back rooms. On the floor, I saw puddles of dirty, melted snow, the kind that drips off heavy winter boots. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down my spine. I took a hesitant step closer to the back, toward the doorway of the supply room. I turned the corner, and my breath caught in my chest. Standing in the darkness, partially obscured by one of the tall metal shelves, was the outline of a man. He was tall, with broad shoulders. I could make out a large, scruffy beard, and he was staring directly at me. My heart stopped. For a moment that felt like an eternity, we just stood there. Then, some strange, detached survival instinct took over. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just slowly backed away, returned to the front counter, and stood there, my eyes locked on the dark doorway to the supply room. I don't know why I reacted that way. Maybe I was just too shocked to process the danger. After what felt like hours, I quietly picked up the store's phone and whispered my situation to the 911 operator. Then came the most terrifying 10 minutes of my life. I waited, not hearing a single sound from the back room. The silence was agonizing. The man never came out. He never confronted me. When 2 police cruisers finally pulled into the lot, their lights painting the inside of the store in strobing colors, I quickly and quietly told them where the man was. They drew their weapons and cleared the room while I waited by the front door, shaking uncontrollably. I was shocked when they came out alone. The man was gone. They found the back delivery door wide open. Surrounding it were watery shoe prints. Outside, a fresh set of tracks in the snow led away from the gas station, straight into the completely dark, empty field that bordered the property for miles. A search was impossible at night. When they did search the following days, they found nothing. He could have gone anywhere. With the wind and the cold that night, I was half sure they'd find a body, but they never did. The police impounded the SUV, hoping for a lead. In another bizarre twist, they couldn't find any history of ownership. The vehicle was a ghost. We were left with nothing. Who was that man? What was he doing hiding in my store? Where did he go? The questions remain unsolved. A chilling mystery that hangs over me every time it starts to snow. My first job, at 16, was as a delivery driver for Pizza Hut. It was a part-time gig after school, a couple of days a week. I chose it specifically because our Pizza Hut was never that busy, and I didn't want a job that would stress me out. For the first few months, it was exactly that. Boring, repetitive, and utterly forgettable. Then, one night, I had an experience that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was a Friday, and we got a late order just a few minutes before closing. The address wasn't far, but it was in a part of town I rarely went to. This neighborhood was older, with fewer streetlights and more wooded areas between the houses. While driving, I kept my eyes on the GPS as it led me through a winding series of turns, deeper into the quiet neighborhood. Finally, the automated voice announced, "You have arrived." But something was wrong. To my left was a short row of about 6 or 7 houses. To my right was a dark, unlit path leading into a small park. The waypoint on my GPS was clearly on the right side, in the park. I pulled over, confused, and double-checked the address on Google Maps. It confirmed the location. The address was for the park itself. I parked on the side of the road, grabbed the pizza, and got out. Walking towards the path, I could see it wasn't much of a park at all, just a paved walking trail that disappeared into the trees. There was no playground, no picnic area, nothing where you'd expect a group of kids to be hanging out. But then I saw him. A little ways down the path, sitting alone on a wooden bench, was a man. He saw me and waved. Still feeling unsure, I started walking toward him. As I got closer, he stood up and began fumbling through his wallet for cash. The whole situation was bizarre. A grown man, alone on a dark walking path at night, ordering a single pizza for delivery. A deep sense of skepticism washed over me as I approached and greeted him. We started the exchange, but as I handed him the pizza, he began talking to himself in a low, frantic whisper. He kept repeating the same phrases over and over. "I'm okay. Everything's going to be okay." It was so unsettling that I felt compelled to ask him, "Sir, are you all right?" He stopped talking instantly and looked up at me. The expression in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. It was pure, undiluted fear and helplessness. That look alone sent a jolt of adrenaline through my entire body. My fight-or-flight instinct screamed at me. I spun around to leave, and my heart stopped. Standing directly in my path was a tall, imposing man wearing a dark cloth mask over his face. He was holding a knife, and the blade glinted under the distant streetlight. He screamed at me to empty my pockets and throw everything on the ground. My wallet, my keys, my phone. I dropped it all without a second thought, my hands shaking so badly I could barely function. But he showed no interest in my belongings. Instead, he started forcefully pushing both me and the man from the bench off the path and into the dark woods. We walked for what felt like an eternity, stumbling over roots and through thick underbrush, until the faint light from the path was completely gone. We were in total darkness. Then suddenly the man next to me, the one who ordered the pizza, shoved me hard to the ground. He took off running in the opposite direction. To my complete surprise, the man in the mask ignored me entirely. He immediately took off after the other guy, crashing through the woods in pursuit. I scrambled back to my feet, my mind reeling, and ran as fast as I could back toward the path, hearing nothing behind me but the sound of my own panicked breathing. The police arrived within minutes of my call, but both men were gone. From what I know, they were never found. I can't say for sure why the other victim pushed me down. I have to believe it was a desperate attempt to save himself, to offer me up as a distraction so he could escape. I don't blame him, not really, but it was a cold, calculated move. And it makes me feel slightly less sorry for whatever happened to him after he ran. What did the masked man intend to do with us? His lack of interest in my valuables makes me think it was something far worse than a simple robbery. In a strange, ironic twist of fate, the selfishness of the other victim is what put me in that terrifying situation, and it's also what ultimately saved me from it. I was out on a late-night delivery, the last one of my shift. It was sometime around 2 a.m. in the small town where I live and work for a local pizza shop. We're one of the only places that delivers, mainly because most of the town is so spread out. The road I was on was a little used back road, a convenient shortcut that cut across town, bypassing all the stoplights. It was a lonely stretch of pavement that wound through the dense forest surrounding our town. As I drove, I noticed something felt off with my car. I glanced at the gas gauge, but it was steady at half a tank. No warning lights were on the dashboard. I tried to ignore it, but the further I went, the more my car began to struggle. It felt sluggish and jerky, like it was fighting me to maintain speed. Then it just stopped accelerating altogether. The engine sputtered and died. The car rolled to a silent stop, and I coasted it onto the grassy shoulder. With a sigh of frustration, I tried to turn the key again. Nothing. I rubbed my tired eyes, got out, and did a walk around, looking for any obvious signs of damage. I'm no mechanic, so I didn't even know what I was looking for. As I stood there on the side of the dark road, I looked ahead, seeing nothing but fog and trees. Then I looked back the way I came, and that's when I saw it. Far in the distance, barely visible in the thick fog, was a figure. A person standing on the opposite side of the road. I quickly got back in my car and locked the doors. I called a co-worker who was also a friend and asked if he could come pick me up. He agreed, but said it would be at least 30 minutes. I thanked him, then called the customer to apologize and explain the situation. All that was left to do was wait. I remembered the figure I'd seen and checked my mirrors. Nothing. I couldn't see anyone on the side of the road or near the trees, though the darkness and fog were so thick it was hard to be sure. I settled back in my seat, opened the pizza box on the passenger seat, and grabbed a slice for myself. As time ticked by, a creeping sense of unease started to grow. Being stranded on this empty road with such limited visibility was starting to get to me. The forest was a wall of blackness just a few feet from my car, and the fog on the road seemed to be getting denser. I waited for 30 agonizing minutes, my eyes constantly darting to my mirrors, scanning the road. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft at first, then growing louder, closer. They were coming from the darkness of the forest next to my car. My blood ran cold. I stared into the fog, and a man materialized from the mist, standing near one of the trees. He walked directly up to my car and knocked on the driver's side window, a disturbingly friendly smile on his face. Sorry, I can't roll the window down," I said through the glass, my voice trembling slightly. The man didn't say anything. He just kept smiling, then casually tried to open my car door. Finding it locked, he walked around to the back of the car. I watched him in my rearview mirror. He stood by the trunk, seeming to duck down for a second, fiddling with something in his hands, as if he was trying to hide. Just then, a pair of headlights cut through the fog from down the road. The man looked up as the car slowed and began to pull over behind me. He immediately turned and ran back into the forest, disappearing into the fog and darkness. My friend must have seen the man too, because he was extremely cautious as he got out of his car and approached mine. We decided to leave my car there for the night. It was on the ride back that my friend told me what he saw. The man standing behind my car had been holding a gun. He ran off just as my friend pulled up. We called the police immediately. When a tow truck went to pick up my car later, they found it had been broken into and looted. It also turned out the gas meter on my old car was faulty. It had gotten stuck in the middle. The tank was completely empty. As for the man, there's been nothing. No leads, no suspects. I don't know what he was planning to do. He obviously robbed my car after I left. But what would he have done to me if he'd managed to get inside while I was still there? And why was he just out there, on that empty road in the middle of the night? All I know for sure is that if my friend hadn't shown up at that exact moment, I'm almost certain I would have never been seen again. Call to action. The world is full of unexplained encounters and terrifying moments that linger long after they're over. If you've ever had an experience that left you questioning your safety, share your story in the comments below. And for more tales from the edge of darkness, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. You never know what might be waiting for you in the night.